I probably don't have to tell our loyal viewers that it has been a very busy week for the Trump administration. In her latest column, the New Yorker Susan Glasser, who's with us now, lays out a catalog of events from the attempt to fire Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook to firing the new CDC director, threats to take over Democratic-run cities, a federal takeover of Union Station, and that's just a partial list. Joining us now, former Montana Senator and MSNBC political analyst Jon Tester, David French, and Susan Glasser still with us. And Susan, let's start with you because the sheer scope of that list seems a bit overwhelming. Expand on what you observed this week.
Yeah, well, I mentioned this was in the context of also the longest and sort of most over-the-top Trump cabinet meeting yet, 3 hours and 17 minutes, televised sycophantry, including, I would point out, we talked about Occupy D.C., which now features a gigantic, huge portrait of the President of the United States on the outside of the Labor Department building. The Labor Secretary used the opportunity of that televised meeting to invite the president to come visit his big, beautiful face on the side of the building. And I think the thing that stitches all these events together is the breathtaking assertions of executive authority, such that we've really never seen from Republicans or Democrats, or, maybe in sort of Richard Nixon's fever dreams. But, what Trump is doing is acting on the kinds of power grabs that many other presidents might have aspired to or, talked about privately, but were constrained in some way either by their own sense of limits or that of their advisors or the courts or the Congress. And Trump is in a moment, I think, of just going for it all across a wide variety of fronts, right? Do you pay attention to the meltdown of the CDC? Do you pay attention to the challenges to the rule of law? Do you pay attention to these big questions about the upending of the global economy? There's just an overwhelming amount of fronts on which Trump and his team are operating right now.
So separate from your diagnosis about what's going down at the DOJ, David, just your reaction to Susan.
Yeah, what we're watching is this flooding the zone with garbage, this sort of constant drumbeat of outrage and scandal, so that I think what it's designed to do and what it actually does is it induces fatigue. It causes people to just sort of retreat slowly from the public square. They don't want to be a part of this anymore. It's just so unrelentingly grim. It's so unrelentingly outrageous. And so against the blizzard of actions, that blizzard of actions in a strange way gives Trump a kind of feeling of impunity. If he's flooding the zone, if people are retreating out of exhaustion, that gives him freedom of action. And this is what we're seeing now. To be clear, there are a lot of people standing up. There are a lot of people who are doing the necessary work of filing lawsuits, of challenging a lot of these activities in court. But you can almost sense in the public this sense of fatigue. He is doing things that in his first term would have triggered days of outrage, large-scale protests, and now it just barely makes a blip in the news cycle. That's a sign of fatigue, and I think it is that fatigue that is actually working in Trump's favor almost more than anything else.
It's a very interesting point. And Senator Tester, what do you make of what you've seen in Washington and beyond in the past week alone?
Well, first of all, both Susan and David are correct. And I would also say that people are out there, regular folks, just trying to make a living. And who wants to pay attention to all this garbage that's going on? But people do need to pay attention, because I don't care what the issue is coming down, it's going to have negative impacts on our democracy, negative impacts on our way of life, and negative impacts up and down the line. Let's take a look at the Fed, for example. If the president's able to politicize the Federal Reserve, it has major negative impacts on our ability to, say, have reserve currency. If the president is able to follow through on not doing any more research for vaccinations, it will have major impacts on the healthcare, particularly on our children. The list goes on and on and on, and David is exactly right. They flood the zone. There's so much information out there. You don't know what to pick up on. You don't know what to leave alone. So people just say, hey, I don't want to listen to this garbage. I'm just going to pay attention to my work and try to make a living and try to feed my family while inflation continues to be a huge issue in this country.
And we will continue to try to break it down as simply as we possibly can here. David, on top of everything that we saw this week, you write about how Trump has taken an atomic bomb, in your words, to the DOJ. Explain what you mean by that. What's he done?
Yeah, I was actually quoting Jack Goldsmith, the former senior Department of Justice official in the George W. Bush administration, one of the most careful observers of the DOJ. That was his phrase, an atomic bomb dropped on the department. And what he meant, and what I also saw when I wrote, is that what Donald Trump has done is through the combination of the pardon power and his prosecutorial discretion directing the DOJ, he has turned the DOJ into an instrument of his vengeance. And he's using he's pushing his constitutional powers to their limit and beyond to reward his friends and to punish his enemies. And we see this in incident after incident after incident where he's disrupting DOJ practices. He's disrupting DOJ policies. All of those disruptions are aimed at implementing his vengeance agenda. And so the DOJ has become what a lot of people feared that it could become, an instrument of the president's own personal priorities rather than an instrument of justice in the United States. And when the president's priorities conflict with the interests of justice, this DOJ goes with the president. That's the atomic bomb.
Okay, so there's definitely a conflation between policy and law, some confusion about where it all lies here. Susan, Trump says that the president can do what he wants, essentially. So where does all of this go?
Well, I think this quote, and I actually was using it, it was a terrific column, and I think a really important one, that observation from Jack Goldsmith, because it's both a revolution in thinking about the role of the Justice Department and the president's power. But I think also it talks about the speed and rapidity with which institutions have been taken over, right? Okay, we're only just a little bit more than 200 days into the second Trump administration. And, it's both mass firings at the Justice Department or large numbers of professional, nonpartisan career officials and career prosecutors who've walked out the door rather than follow through on what they consider to be illegitimate demands, combined with overturning of norms, rules, and precedents inside the Department of Justice that tried to insulate justice from nakedly partisan concerns. Remember, in the Nixon era, you had an attorney general who ultimately went to jail, John Mitchell, because of his role in the Watergate cover-ups. And it was in response to that over the last several decades that we built up these traditions, which Trump has managed, I think, to do quite a strong job of eliminating or getting rid of for the course of his rule. That's a short period of time. So my question going forward is, having gone to these lengths to acquire these powers, again, we're only 200 days into this. You don't work so hard to get a hammer and then not start pounding nails. And I fear that that's the stage of the Trump presidency that we're just entering right now.